Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. And this is your weekly dose of disappointment brought to you by Antony Davies in answer to the question, what's new and exciting in your world this week? And I want to stress that what we need here is something that is both new and exciting, which is almost impossible for you, but I need them both.
Well, I'm going to go for the trifecta. It's neither new nor exciting, nor is it even in my world. It's in California.
You and California deserve each other.
I want to talk about the high-speed train that they've been building for some time there.
By the time they finish that train, light speed travel is going to be possible.
The voters approved that thing, I think, in 2009.
Serves them right. They should have known what they were getting themselves into. How did they not know that this was going to happen?
Well, voters approved it in 2009, and the original price tag was going to be $33 billion.
I'm guessing it's a touch more expensive now.
I believe it's a case that in 2009, they said it would be done sometime in the early 2020s. That date has been put off several times. It's now sitting at 2033. That's assuming it isn't put off again. The time to completion has grown by a factor of whatever that is, 2 or 3. The cost has grown by a factor of 4. That $33 billion project is, as of now, I underline as of now, a $123 billion project.
I'm betting that there are some politically well-connected people doing well on these government contracts.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see who exactly is making some money off of this thing. But I want to put that $123 billion price tag in perspective. California's state debt, now not the local, but the state debt, is round about $140 billion. This one project is going to come close to doubling California's debt.
And it's a project no one needs. It's a train no one asked for.
Yeah, and this is kind of the strange thing, because if it were a private business, and I find myself saying that a lot recently in talking about government projects, if this were a private business. If it was a private business that quoted a $33 billion price tag and didn't come in at $33 billion, there'd be all sorts of problems here. There'd be lawsuits. There'd be people who had their own money on the line that are going bankrupt. The thing certainly wouldn't be receiving more money. And yet somehow when government pulls this kind of thing, the answer is give them more money. We are literally rewarding this behavior.
How on earth they thought this wouldn't be the end result, I have no idea. I remember when this came up in the late 2000s, and we all said the same thing. What a boondoggle that's going to be. And now they're saying it won't be done until 2033. You got to be kidding me.
I want to head off the counter argument here. People are going to say things like, well, understand this is a high-speed train. It's new technology, all of that.
It's a no-speed train. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, currently it's a no-speed train. But I would point people for an example to the Northeastern Corridor Amtrak Acela. It's not a high-speed train in that sense, but it was supposed to be much faster than the standard Amtrak train. Recent estimates were that it was something on the order of 6 minutes faster. And not only do you lose those 6 minutes, you lose another 3 because of how they redesign the train stations, and it takes you longer to get off the train and get to wherever it is you want to go. So my guess is we're going to end up with a same speed train.
I actually like the idea of trains. I enjoy taking them when they're available. This typically means, when I'm in other countries where they make perfect sense to have trains, given that the countries are small and the distances not Herculean as they are in the United States. For a while, every time I had to travel in the U.S., I would look and see what I could do to take a train instead of flying. And it was always way more expensive, and it always took way more time.
This is one of the things you get when government undertakes projects rather than companies. With a company, it's the stockholders, their money's on the line, they've got a profit incentive to make sure things are working well. With the government, what do you have here?
You have no accountability.
Well, yeah, but really no accountability, because this plan was put into effect in 2009. I don't know, but I'm pretty certain that whatever politicians were in power in California at the time this project was initiated are long gone.
It's California, so let's say many of them.
Many of them are gone, right.
No, it's a one-party state. It's not like there's a whole lot of turnover.
Yeah, but you know who isn't gone, James? The taxpayer. the guy who had little say in this and is going to be stuck with the bill.
Oddly enough, I'm kind of staying in California. I want to talk about the Oscars. It is Oscar weekend, which means we're recording this on Friday. The Oscars will happen on Sunday, and you will listen to this at some time in the future. But that might be for the best, because what I want to talk about is this headline I saw today. With its future at stake, the Academy tries to fix the Oscars again. Every year, this show comes on TV, and it lasts way too long. It's filled with self-congratulatory nonsense, and in the end, nobody's happy to have wasted their time watching it. I don't want to see a bunch of celebrities congratulating themselves on how great they are. Now, I like watching movies, but I don't want to hear actors talk. I want to see actors act. But for the love of God, you've got the political sophistication of 4-year-olds. Next time they put a microphone in front of your face, say something like, "Wow, I can't believe I'm getting an award for this. Thank you so much."
We've got to put in Ricky Gervais's opening to the Oscars. That was beautiful.
That's right. Ricky Gervais had it exactly right. What an utter privilege some people live with. And I don't begrudge them that privilege at all. If you entertain that many people and make that many people happy, hey, go nuts. So the Academy tries to fix the Oscars again. Will it? I do hereby predict, no, it will not. There will be all kinds of talk about diversity and equity and inclusion. And then when presented with the idea that, okay, in order to operationalize that, all of you are saying, you know what we should really do? No more Best Actor and Best Actress Oscars. Let's just have one category. And I do hereby predict that when push comes to shove and we say, let's have only one award, everybody's going to think, now I have half the chance of winning. No, let's continue to have two. For the foolishness of the week, we're going to go to the country of Colombia. The headline, 28 girls rushed to hospital after playing with Ouija board at school.
The Ouija board sent them to the hospital? What's going on here?
Well, apparently, I mean, that's the implication of the headline. I would, as a normal person say, was there perhaps a gas leak at the school? Did they eat school lunch? But no. I'm supposed to believe that 28 girls were rushed to the hospital because they played with a Ouija board. My mother, God rest her soul, was very upset when I brought a Ouija board home. Mm-hmm. And she said, and I quote, "You'll bring demons into the house." And I thought, you got to be kidding me. How can anybody believe that? And in order to peel away the mystery of the Ouija board, I went to where you always go to peel away the mystery of everything at Amazon.com, where, come to find out, you can buy a Ouija board right now for $21.95. And nowhere on this page do I see a warning about a portal to hell. As a matter of fact, and here's where it gets truly hilarious, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, there's a section called Important Information. And then it says Legal Disclaimer. There are no legal disclaimers.
You're kidding me, really?
I'm not. You would think that if there were a portal to hell warning, it would be in the legal disclaimer part. And you would think that they would put it there even though they know it's ridiculous, just because somebody's going to sue. And then they could say, well, we told you you could open a portal to hell, but you didn't pay any attention. And if 28 young children ended up in the hospital after they played with a Ouija board, they ended up in the hospital for some other reason. Now, that reason might be that everybody there is crazy, or it might be that they got food poisoning, or that there was a gas leak. There's a million different things it could be. But the one thing I know for a fact it is not is anything to do with the Ouija board.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. If you're a full-time college student looking for something educational, fun, and free, apply to join me and James and several faculty who have appeared on Words and Numbers at the inaugural summer seminar on the theory and practice of classical liberalism. The week-long seminar is hosted by the Stevenson Institute at Wabash University and will be held June 5th through the 10th. There's no charge, and meals and lodging are provided. To apply, see the link in the show notes.
I saw just recently about property rights on the moon. I think it was because the Chinese were starting to claim that they own the moon now.
I didn't see this. The Chinese actually said they own the moon?
All I remember is that some idiot said something about owning something way out in outer space, and I said, oh God, now I got to talk about this with Antony again. But then something else came up, and I said, this is really a thing. And now I want to talk about outer space, and you didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I just want to underline here, this is entirely James' idea.
It was, and I'm starting to feel a little ashamed of myself here, but why don't you tell the people what we're up against today?
All right, so let's just follow the chain of events here. James, let's talk about outer space. Ant, I don't have anything to say about outer space. James, no, I really want to talk about outer space. Ant, okay, let's talk about outer space. James, take it away, Ant.
Take it away, Ant.
I have nothing to say. Well, all right, I actually took some notes in preparation for this.
This is why I knew I could count on you. You're an inveterate note taker. When's the last time you saw me write anything down?
There's a treaty that has been in place since 1967. 112 countries signed on to it over time, the Outer Space Treaty. It does a number of things. It prohibits nuclear weapons in space, doesn't prohibit weapons, it prohibits nuclear weapons in space, limits the use of the moon and celestial bodies to peaceful purposes. And this is what I found the interesting part, prohibits countries from claiming sovereignty over bodies. In this manner, it reads a lot like the Antarctic Treaty of a few years earlier.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that interests me. The treaty locks down governments. It says the government may not have nuclear weapons in space. Well, the governments are the only things that have nuclear weapons, but the governments may only use space for peaceful purposes. The governments may not claim sovereignty. There's nothing in this treaty that says that private individuals can't do what they like. So if Elon Musk wants to go set up a plot on the moon and say this is Musk country, well, I don't think there's anything that can stop him. In fact, if anything, the treaty seems to prohibit countries from attempting to stop him.
So I can bring my guns to the moon if Elon Musk builds a big moon hotel.
That seems to be the case. And
this is probably not the takeaway I thought we were going to have here.
The more I dug into this, the more strange I found it. And maybe it's the case that in 1967, when the treaty was being signed, people didn't appreciate how quickly it was going to be before having something like a moon base was actually a possibility. It's a possibility now. We just haven't actually gone and done it.
Why haven't we gone and done it?
Why haven't we gone and done it? Because thus far, it's been so expensive that only governments could handle this kind of thing.
Well, sure, but why haven't we even gone back to the moon?
Oh, why hasn't any government gone? But yeah, right.
And here I submit that something fishy has been going on for years. I don't know what it is, but other people know what it is. Some people in this world know what it is. We have steadfastly avoided anything to do with the moon for a very long time, and so have almost all the other nations of the earth.
I don't have a lot of details about what other nations are doing. I know the Chinese have, or at least had until a couple of years ago, a rover on the moon. And I know that the United States was talking about putting a rover on the moon relatively recently. But no, we haven't put people on there.
We had space shuttles. We could have run missions to the moon. We did not do that.
I'm going to throw out a hypothesis here in defense of the government. In my hypothesis...
All right, back off. Am I hearing this correctly? In defense of the government is what you just said.
I'm going to throw out a hypothesis that boils down to I think the government may have done the right thing. And that is, we made multiple trips to the moon. Took lots of people there, almost lost several with Apollo 13. Took a lot of people there, brought stuff back. In terms of exploration, as far as I can tell, did pretty much as could be done given the technology of the time. And two other things are going on. One, the public's losing interest in this. It's no longer a novel thing. And two, every time we send people to the moon, there's a risk that something will happen, someone will get killed, and that could turn public opinion against any kind of space project. So it may well have been that the government cut its losses here and said, I shouldn't say cut its losses, that the government said, look, we've done enough. Let's not push matters any further because what's to be gained is going to be small. What's to be lost could be quite large. And if we just wait a few decades, the technology will be much better and there'll be much lesser chance of loss of life. We could do it more cheaply, all this sort of thing.
That's a level of rationality that I don't often credit the government with. I have never known government to be that rational about anything. That's not to say you're wrong. It's just to say I would be shocked if that were correct. I think there's something fishy going on. I would love to know what it is. I don't suspect I ever will. But it seems that we became allergic to the moon at some point.
The thing that bothers me here has nothing to do with questions of aliens or anything like that. What bothers me is the fact that the moon is a fantastic resource, and we're not even attempting to harness that resource. Up until recently, it was technological. We simply couldn't do this. But we're now reaching a point where we can do this. And we're going to encourage entrepreneurs not to take advantage of this resource simply because we haven't established property rights. And we haven't established property rights in part because of this treaty that says that governments can't be involved in outer space.
Well, yeah, now you're never going to have property rights. And it's not the moon, it's space more generally, right? You're going to be left with a situation where private companies end up sending off whatever missions they're allowed, and notice the word, they're permitted to send, and they're going to claim whatever it is that they can manage to claim. But it's going to stymie all kinds of development. Unless you know for a fact that you can keep developing.
Right. Why would you invest?
You're never going to start. This is going to be the problem. It's kind of like once upon a time building a big giant ship and looking across the ocean and saying, I would love to take my ship over there. Can I keep what I find?
Right.
If the answer is no, you're not taking your ship.
Or closer to home, the westward expansion in the United States. None of that would have been possible if it weren't for the fact that we had property rights. Now, some of the property rights were issued by government. Some of them were spontaneous, that people out there where there was no government said, okay, here's how we're going to go about establishing what you own and what I own.
Yeah. A lot of that worked. It remains in effect to this day. We've received this sort of thing over time, and we don't realize how far it goes back. It's almost like the common law, right? It just shows up one day fully formed. But here's the thing. It was possible to get west, to use that example, without anybody noticing. Right? You could just pack up and go. You start going straight up into the atmosphere, everybody's going to know. And that's going to be a problem. You can't just do that. I understand the spirit in which this sort of thing is signed. Doesn't seem like a particularly good idea. And, let's back up for a second. You said 112 countries signed on to this.
That's right.
There aren't 112 countries who run any risk whatsoever of traveling into space.
Yeah, and that struck me as I'm reading it. I'm wondering who signed it, and did the handful of countries that actually could put something into space, and by handful, I think that at the time there were two, Soviet Union and the United States, were they signatories?
You could add China and India and Israel, right? There are other countries now.
But it's still like you can count it on two hands.
But did the Bahamas sign off on this?
right, yeah.
Nonetheless, it has exactly the force that every international agreement has ever had, meaning to say none, because the minute one country wants to violate it, that's exactly what's going to happen.
I want to point out something here. Something interesting happened over the past few decades. We start off with NASA, funded by the government, going into space, getting to the moon. And that's the way stuff was done for decades. Until you started to get businesses. Now, they weren't really going into space, but they would put up satellites. You get private rockets, right? Paid for by a business, puts it in orbit, they do their thing.
And thank God for it, or none of us would get TV.
But look at the progression. Now you get Elon Musk doing the sorts of things he does, and he has stated outright, now granted, he hasn't done it, but he stated outright that his goal is to put some people on Mars. We're at the point now where it's possible that someone with $1 billion of wealth could get to the moon. And now you can look at that and say, well, all right, yeah, but they're billionaires, right? But look backward. Stuff that middle-class people do today are things that billionaires of 2 centuries ago could only do. I give it 50 years, 75 years before the upper middle class are talking about, well, let's go open up a summer home on the moon.
All right, not so fast, because it's 2023, and in the year 2000, I was told I would have a flying car.
We can't even get self-driving cars, let alone flying ones.
Oh, for crying out loud. My car's in the shop again. Way to go, Subaru. And by the way, if you're out there thinking to yourself, I'm going to buy a Subaru, don't do it. Learn from my error.
And you can see our new strategy here on Words and Numbers. We can't get people to pay us for advertising, so we're going to see if we can get them to pay us to stop advertising.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. Let's go the other way. And maybe we could sell advertising, because what am I going to say? Do the smart thing. Buy a Toyota or a Honda.
I can agree with that. My first car when I was, good Lord, 22, 23, was a Toyota?
I'm surprised you're not still driving
They've all been Toyotas. Our Toyota van right now has 350,000 miles on it.
The damn things are bulletproof. You get sick of them long before they run out of gas. And here I am. So, let's not lose our mind about the possibilities of technology, Ant, because I don't think anybody in the upper middle class is going to go build a summer home on Mars.
Oh, I think so. A century. 2 at the outside.
Yeah, see, you've gone from 50 to 75 to 100 to 200.
Yeah, but notice what's happening. Neither one of us is saying no. We're disagreeing on how long it's going to take.
That's right. Look, I think all technological things happen in time. I don't know how this is going to happen, but I do suspect that at some point we'll have transporter technology and we'll just beam ourselves where we want to go. How will that work? I have no idea. But every other thing that ever happened on Star Trek has come to pass. Right. Is this going to happen? Yeah, probably. Are we going to figure out warp drive? They tell us that we can't travel at the speed of light. And then they started, by they, I mean physicists, started saying, well, if you could, it wouldn't be because you could propel a craft quickly. It's because you could actually bend space-time.
Right.
And travel through that.
Which to the regular Joe, it doesn't matter. The fact is I'm going faster than the speed of light. I don't care how it's happening.
But, Ant, that's what a warp drive did in Star Trek, right? That's exactly
what it did. Right.
What a warp drive did. I don't discount the possibility of technology, not by a long shot. I think given the miracles that we've seen in our lives, and we have seen miracles, we just don't think of them as such because we saw the progression that led to them. But think about all the things. I mean, you and I can talk right now. We are separated by 2,500 miles, and we're looking at each other on screens that are hooked up to a magic box.
Well, it's funny you say that because I've got an extra wide screen. I've got James blown up on the whole thing. And as you're talking about Star Trek, I'm thinking, wow, I'm having the exact same experience Kirk had every time he said, put the guy on screen, and he's there talking to whoever it is.
Yeah, that's right.
Of course, I got James, but
and that's
same idea.
The closest you'll ever get to Kirk, ever. I know you want to be Kirk. I know you do. And yet you're Spock. You're Spock and I am Kirk.
I am so itchy to say screen off right now and just close them.
Look, if it makes you feel better, I don't want to be Kirk. I want to be Picard, but I'm not Picard. I'm Kirk.
You got the hairstyle.
And I don't have the temperament. They say that every human being is represented by a character in The Godfather, and everybody wants to be Michael. I'm Sonny. Your age, I don't remember what her name was. Michael's wife. What was her name?
Screen off, James.
But I was reading today in another story, and I'll throw the article in the show notes. The Chinese sent a couple of spy satellites up, and they violated airspace over Texas in so doing. The gigantic rocket that they sent up crashed back into Texas. Wouldn't it be nice if we knew that we could address this sort of thing? If there were a mechanism by which we could guarantee that their space junk didn't fall all over Houston.
Yeah, but see, what you're doing is bumping up against property rights. And this is the beautiful thing.
That's right.
Because people who aren't into these sorts of things would hear property rights, and I've heard this from people, and they'll say, well, that's just about greed. You just want to claim everything for yourself. That's not it. Property rights are about avoiding conflict by having it all laid out. Okay, this is the airspace, whatever it is, and something of yours comes in here. We understand what happens now. The next thing that happens is you pay for the damage. But you can't do that if you don't have property rights.
And you can see where there might be a disastrous loss of life with this sort of thing. Now, it just so happens that most of this material was vaporized upon reentry, and the rest of it fell over some of the least populous counties in all of Texas. And if you've been through Texas, you know that that's code word for wide open space with no humans in it. They've even said they haven't been able to retrieve any pieces, which means it's probably all dust by the time it made it to the ground. But that's really not the point. The point is that these things do happen. And wouldn't it be nice if we could adjudicate them on the front end instead of on the back end?
Yes.
Because when you adjudicate things on the back end, what do you get? You get countries very hostile with one another, taking chunks out of each other in every way they can. If you adjudicate on the front end, you've got contract law.
You've got insurance.
That's right. If this happens, then this is what you must do. And how do I know? Well, have I ever violated the property rights of other people in the United States? Yes, I've done it many times. We all have. And when that happens, there are very clear rules in place as to what happens next. I think the most profound version of this is I've had car accidents that were my fault. That's a violation of property rights. I ruined other people's cars. Well, the insurance that I paid for their cars. Then the insurance that I paid for got way more expensive. We have an entire system in place to deal with these things. Well, that's actually quite a good thing, isn't it? Because if I hit your car and I didn't have insurance, you would have every motivation to come and find me and get whatever you could.
Yes. And in the process, likely take more than I should. And then you've got a claim against me, and this goes back and forth.
Well, that's right. You would come and you would do violence to me, and in doing that, I would immediately do violence in return to you. And yet all of that could have been avoided with a couple of pretty easy rules. That's really what we're talking about when we talk about treaties in outer space.
Notice the two-pronged approach here. On the one hand, you have government that sets the property rights and enforces them. Says, okay, this is how property rights are going to work. And if people aren't obeying them as a last resort, government can come in and use force to enforce them. And then you leave it alone to the markets and things like you're talking about insurance and how insurance paid for that guy and in turn raised your insurance rates. The government didn't set that up. That's spontaneous order. Entrepreneurs came up with that model.
Yeah, it's not exactly, though, because government required it.
Well, it required it, but entrepreneurs created that tool of insurance.
That's right. It's a point well taken, but I remember when insurance was optional. You could elect to have it or not. And when you had an accident, everybody walked on eggs for a minute before we found out if you had insurance.
Yeah.
You had to insure yourself against uninsured motorists. And what that ended up doing was raising your rates commensurate with the risk. And I think this is a proper role of government. Government came in and said, we do hereby reduce the risk by demanding everybody carry the insurance. Now, that had the net effect in a lot of ways of raising the price of insurance because once it's mandated, everybody needs to have it, and you see how this is going to play out in markets. But there was no easy answer here. Somebody had to make a tough call, and I think in the end it was the right tough call to make. I see a pretty rational argument on the other side of this, so don't send the hate mail. I get it. This is one of them 60-40 things, not 100-0. You always want to use the word entrepreneur, and I think it's appropriate here because in the end, every one of these companies makes a profit. And then, you end up with these things called the high-risk pool, where uninsurable people fall under different rules, right? Because for some reason, we still want to make sure they can stay on the road. I think maybe it'd be better if they didn't. But that's another fight for another day. 99.9% of everything is pretty well covered at this point with auto insurance in the U.S., and I think it's kind of a remarkable achievement. And it didn't happen under the direction of anybody. And I suspect you would see all kinds of different versions of this come and go until we landed on the things that would work well. Are you and I going to go into space? I really doubt it. I think we're too old. I think that by the time this is affordable, we'll either be gone or even more infirm than we already are. Nonetheless, I bet our children will be able to do it if they want to.
Conversations like this, I always think to my grandmother, who, over the course of her life, when she was born, the airplane had not been invented.
Wow.
By the time she died, we had the space shuttle.
God, that's ridiculous.
Isn't that astounding? Yeah.
I was talking to some young people this morning, and I said, look, I remember not having air conditioning.
Oh, I remember most people not having air conditioning.
Everybody takes it for granted that you'll have air conditioning. And I said, look, I even have a friend whose house didn't have heat except for a wood stove.
Yeah.
Of course, that was you. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, I've experienced that.
It was you when you finally put actual heat into it well after the year 2010. How on earth did you buy a house with no heat? How was that up to code?
It's West Virginia. Nobody tells us what to do there.
So it goes with human life. It gets better and miracles happen. And then you take those miracles for granted and more miracles happen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I have central air now, which means I can live in the desert like I do. It's 85 degrees out here today, and I'm actually thinking, geez, I'm going to have to turn on the air conditioner. When we're thinking about going to the moon because we feel like it, air conditioning the desert doesn't seem like that big a deal. On that happy note, Ed, I think we've run out of time, but as is often the case, you start talking about outer space and property rights and you just can't shut up anymore.
It's very exciting.
Even I think it's kind of interesting when it gets into an actual context like this, right?
I can't promise anything because I don't know what her constraints are, but I'm hoping to get my sister-in-law on, who, believe it or not, is actually a space lawyer. Her specialty
Space
is
Force.
the law in space. Yeah.
I've been wanting to get somebody from Space Force on for a while now, mostly so I could ridicule them.
Oh, you be careful. She'll tear you a new one. Then she'll tear me a new one for letting you ridicule her.
Well, I think your concern is that she'll tear you a new one. But I got this in my head when I gone to the rodeo here in Tucson. There's this gigantic buildup to the national anthem. The rodeo people love the national anthem. The great buildup includes young ladies on horses riding out with flags, each representing one of the armed forces. And I'm sitting there saying to my daughter, what are the odds that the Coast Guard gets a flag? Because you know they're going to want to have more flags. More is better. And lo and behold, they said, and the United States Coast Guard. And I felt this exhilaration. And then they said, and Space Force. When Space Force has its own flag at the rodeo, I think we have to contend that it's now a thing.
They've arrived.
And why didn't they call it something else? Did they have to call it that? Space Force. It's just ridiculous. And now I kind of want to deal with Space Force a little bit because I'm of a mind, A, that every part of the government is ridiculous, onerous, and unnecessary. But God, I like science stuff and outer space is fascinating. And what the hell are they doing anyway? I don't know what they do, but I'd like to hear it from them. So if your sister-in-law is allowed to talk about her work with Space Force, I think we should have her on too. This will be great. On that happy note, we'll be by to talk about something else next week that has nothing to do with outer space, I'm guessing. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter. And why the hell aren't you? The handles are in the show notes. You can join Words and Numbers backstage where the conversation continues. That's kind of been fun lately. There's new people who show up and say crazy things. Then we say crazy things. What else can the people do besides emailing us? I get so much spam at the Words and Numbers email address. Now they're calling me Tommy. Dear Tommy, we've got this deal for you. What the hell are you signing up for under the name Tommy?
Something happens from time to time. I think someone who disagrees with our points of view runs across one of our episodes and signs us up for all sorts of junk mail.
What kind of time do these people have on their hands?
And you're actually getting less of it than you would otherwise because I go through and unsubscribe as soon as we're subscribed. You're only seeing what manages to make its way through my filter.
You're not unsubscribing fast enough. And before we close the show, and we probably should have done this earlier, the nice people out there have heard me talk about my love of T-shirts, and I do love like idiosyncratic T-shirts from weird out-of-the-way places. One of our listeners, a great friend of the podcast, actually, a guy from your past.
Gordon Snyder, who owns and runs Johnson's Cafe in Montoursville, Pennsylvania. It's a great place. James and I have eaten there.
I don't think I have eaten there.
I used to go there all the time as a kid and have been back several times as an adult.
I said today that you and I should go there next time we're in central Pennsylvania because I don't think I've ever eaten there. And I'd really like to because Gordon sent me 2 T-shirts today from his restaurant. They are fantastic black T-shirts with white print. And I just love this sort of thing.
Yeah, I got a couple too.
I wear people's, and I remember when Luke Brimhall sent one from his snack company. Luke, if you're still out there listening, thank you.
That was a great story that's worth repeating. Luke Brimhall, who runs...
And it is a great story because we both remember his name.
Yeah, the company is Brim's Snacks.
Brim's Snacks.
The interesting thing is, he was a listener of the podcast, but did not participate in Backstage, had no contact with us. We happened to mention his company in one of the quick hits. He says he's there.
Isn't that crazy?
He's driving along and he hears his company being mentioned. Yeah, so he sent us a box of snacks and T-shirts.
Yeah, and the snacks were really good. I can't eat them anymore, diabetes and all. But the T-shirt is still in my rotation. It has seen better days, I have to tell you. But it's still in the closet, and I'm still getting some use out of it. But I got a couple of new ones today. I'll have somebody at the house take a picture and I'll throw it up on Backstage so you can see. I mean, the pictures are fantastic, and I really can't wait to go and try the food.
So, Gordy Snyder, thanks for the T-shirts.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. That was really sweet of you. Wholly unnecessary, but so appreciated. Thank you so much.
Any of the listeners who find themselves in the neighborhood of Montoursville, Pennsylvania, drop by Johnson's Cafe. It's a great place.
Go check Gordon out. Friends Food Beer, it says across the back of the shirt. That, to me, sounds like a winning combination. On that happy note, we take our leave of you, and until next week, please be nice to each other. Everybody's getting kind of nasty, and I think it's because these idiots are all declaring that it's time for them to run for president. And already I see people dividing up into their little tribes. How about we all stay in a big tribe that says they're all morons and we could do better if we just tried for a minute, but let's not yell at each other. There's plenty of time for that later. We could put it off for now. Until that time comes, be nice to each other. It's actually worth it. I'll even be nice to you, Ann. I'll catch you next week.
See you next week, James.